So, of course, that comes out of two surprises for me. First off, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. The first surprise is to sort of be here at all. The problem with any kind of archival system, of course, as you know, is retrieval. So, consequently, what I'll present today is a kind of invitation. It'll be open and informal, so just to say you're all invited to comment at any point. Please don't hesitate. It's also to give you the warning, nobody is safe. So that's the first point. And the second point, one of the reasons I was so interested in doing this when I was asked, was that second surprise, came out with your presentation, a presentation that was absolutely brilliant and enervating, that is to say, annoying in the very best sense because it makes you think, made me think and rethink what I was going to present today, and in fact it's a process that's still actively going on. So to proceed in terms of a conversation seems a quite good way to do that. We will also have some rigor, I hope, in that conversation, and attend to some of the themes that were brought up, implicated, imbricated, suggested, circumscribed in various presentation. So, first one, if you'll indulge me with a kind of exercise. There are four categories that I'll sort of work around: bodies, machines, techniques, worlds. So, the first set of bodies to attend to. How many of you here have seen James Cameron's first Terminator film? Pretty much a good proportion. What's the first shot in that film?
Arnold naked, appearing naked.
No.
Is it a motorcycle shot?
No. That's a good test of your memory.
The back alley of the street. The back alley of the street.
No. Don't stop there. Please, more guesses. The very first shot, James Cameron's film. Because we have to attend to how things work, how things are constructed, how bodies are placed, inscribed, become available, come into appearance. Huh? No other guesses? Very first shot of Terminator. Yes, please.
This is a total guess. It's been so long since I've seen it, but was it one of the mechanical skeletons walking out of a fire?
No.
Perchance?
No.
Walking into a fire.
No.
Was it the mother having a dream or something like that?
No.
This is John Connor in the future.
No.
The camera being turned on.
No, not precisely.
That's close. That's the close you just gave me.
Well, there's an after and cataphragm, famous impossible clues, maybe, maybe not. Certainly there's a camera there at all times. No, the first shot is a vertical pan. It begins in black. The camera moves slowly down. You begin to see a kind of blue actinic glow at the bottom of the screen. There's a time sequence that comes up in the middle of that too. Low subharmonics, and as the camera continues its transit, you begin to hear kind of ray gun zaps, explosions. The sound gradually comes up. By the time you get down, you've gone through a title sequence, and you rest in a blue wasteland. You see in the background some movement. You can't quite make out the movement. You see flashes. You hear the sound of discharges, the standard cinematic ray guns and lasers and phasers and whatnot. And you see the skeletons of buildings first, architecture, and then some of these move. Then you see vehicles, a jeep drives through, more flashes, and the camera finally comes to rest on a few skulls. Remember that scene?
Less than the one, I'm sorry.
Skulls, a collection of skulls, crania.
Yeah, with the crap that smashes down that thing.
No, not yet. That comes in the second one.
Oh.
The camera rests, and then there's another shot. The camera rests on a field of skulls. Is that familiar to everybody now? So,
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, we'll find that, individually, I cheat, of course, because I look at these things over and over again. But we'll find that the questions that erupts among us like that, you don't necessarily catch individually. Collectively, we can, within 15 minutes, more or less recompose the storyboard for that film. It's quite remarkable. Anyway, next question. What have we learned from that transit?
Language precedes death.
Good. How? And what precedes language?
How does it precede language?
What precedes language?
What precedes?
In that shot, it's a very didactic shot. What have we learned? The only language that really appears there is what? Written. Inscribed on the screen. It's a title. What have we learned in that shot? There's no wrong way to answer this, please. Whatever comes to mind. What do you think you've learned in that shot? Please speak up. Where are you?
Sort of dystopic. Los Angeles.
You don't know that yet. But someplace dystopic, right? What's the first little trope that you have? Ruin. There are ruins. The skeletons of buildings, a jagged and imprecise landscape, blue flashes, something is going on.
It's the future.
How do you know?
Because everyone's dead.
Interesting. And how do you put those things together? Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, we know that we're in the future, but in those first few moments, we learn how to read. There is a kind of tacit and embedded rhetoric in that very first shot, by which we begin to learn, and by the way, that also continues to be elaborated throughout the film. We learn how to read that film. We are in the future. How do you know we're in the future? We haven't seen the robots yet in that shot. Indistinct movement, stuff like that. We don't quite know yet. How do we tend to that such that we know fairly quickly in this film the difference between past, present, future?
Well, if we looked at film logic, right, because we all already, the director would assume that we have some familiarity with film logic. We're going, this is a pan, and the way titles go, you know that there's a sequence that comes after, so you know there's a progression. So therefore, I would assume, according to film logic, you would figure out where in the timeline you're at.
There is indeed a contingent technical unconscious there, yes. Sure. Yes, please, go ahead.
I can't recall the soundtrack, but maybe that could give a clue to the fact that it's the future. Possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like gunfire, a low rumble, things falling over, things exploding, that sort of thing. It gets louder and louder as you finally rest on the field of skulls. The field of skulls are a very good clue. It's also a scene that is continually reinforced. If it sets up a kind of proleptic configuration of foreshadowing, if you will, also a suspense and an anticipation of what is to come, there are bonded to that analeptic moments where there's a kind of culmination of that leads back into it. It does become, in this sense, as Julius says, a kind of time machine. So the force of signification, the spark, if you will, leaps across that gap. The shape of that is elliptical, proleptic, analeptic. I'll give you a good example. Forgive my digression. How many of you saw Ghostbusters? All right, everybody. Ghostbusters. At a certain point, Sigourney Weaver has gone to the grocery store. She's left Ghostbusters headquarters, goes to the grocery store, comes in with two big brown paper bags. The camera's at a low angle, facing into the kitchen, refrigerator, actually your side, refrigerator here, cupboard here, sink here, table in front, camera must be on the table at a low angle. Sigourney Weaver comes in, turns, puts the two bags of groceries on the table, turns around, attending to something at the sink, the water goes on. Something falls out of the grocery bag. What is it? Yeah, we all know this story. Annie Potts, a bit later, is in the Ghostbusters headquarters, on a telephone, typing, keyboarding, eating something. What's she eating? Of course. What kind of marshmallows? There are several other places in the film where those appear. They're not product placement. They're not marked as such. There's no enunciative apparatus to secure them as product placement. They're proleptic instances that remain unconscious until that analeptic moment when poor hapless Dan Aykroyd is standing there as the gates of hell are thrown open and plucked from his mind the very form of the destruction of all humanity comes about in the form of a 20-story tall Stay-Puft Marshmallow Man. So it lends the force of that signification that makes it both more ridiculous and more teleological, more fated, if you will. And so that connection between the analeptic and proleptic is there's a kind of seeding, if you will, that goes out throughout the film. It structures the appearance of bodies, whether it's the body of the Stay-Puft Marshmallow Man or others. So what I will hope to do throughout our conversation is to put into occlusion a certain kind of rhetorical disposition and a psychoanalytic disposition, which I hope you will help me out with, because they inform each other in a very interesting sort of way. Back to the Terminator. We presume it's in the future. There's no landscape such as we are presented here. It's not anything that we're familiar with. War zones don't quite look like that. They're not quite so blue. And we have to begin to interrogate, and this goes back to Christina's point about the cinematic. We have to investigate what the blue filter does. And basically what it does every time it appears. But before we go there, did you notice anything odd about the skulls?
Were they metallic?
I do like this look of consternation on your faces. It's quite nice. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, were they metallic?
No, not at all. No.
Slightly more geometric than the skull would be.
Oh, that's an interesting thing. Only very slightly. But that may be something we are required to repress. Please.
Jawless? Jawless, about the lower.
No, not entirely. Some of them have the jaw, but you're getting closer. What is it about the skulls that is strange? Please.
Was there no skeleton, just perfect skulls, nothing else there, just like piling up on
A pile of skulls. Now, logic would compel you to inquire. If it's a pile of skulls, there are no femoris, tibia, humerus, etc., just a pile of skulls. Who put them there? We have inferred something is going on. There are machines, there's a ruin, it's probably a war, it is a war zone. In that war zone, by the time we've gotten to the skulls, we've kind of figured out machines, humans. There are a lot of machines such as we can't see. They're illuminated in just a flash, a kind of off-blitzen, just a kind of lightning flash to secure that image, almost as a kind of after image. So, men machines. The machines are busy eradicating the humans. The humans are busy not being eradicated, fighting back with the machines. Who put all the skulls into a pile? No, it's a place where there's a kind of slip, a kind of misprision, a méconnaissance, if you will, where rhetorically it stands as a marker for a kind of killing field, a place of battle. And by the way, it has precedence. There's a genealogy for precisely such sorts of markers. If you go to the panorama at Waterloo, it's one of the last surviving panoramas which has not been refurbished, restored, rebuilt. You go in and it smells a bit moldy, and things are a bit tawdry and shabby, but you go in and you see exactly the same thing. As you look around and you see the entire landscape of Waterloo, and by the way, the changes are interesting, but they do actually correspond. This hill within the building corresponds to the hill that would be outside the film. So there's a kind of cartography between that architecture and that site. You see which things have changed. You also notice as you look down, and consistent with the protocols and rules for constructing these kinds of illusions, you will see also the marks, the signifiers of a killing field, and you will see what? Skulls, swords. You don't see bridles or saddles or boots. You don't see bones of any other kind. You see skulls and swords. So it already operates within a signifying register, which also has a kind of rhetorical disposition. You're not supposed to notice that. You're not supposed to notice that first shot. But you absolutely learn from that.
I've never seen Geprüfte, actually, but insofar
Now you know your assignment.
there's insofar as it's a downward moving pan, are we not also immediately in what we can understand to be a religious time machine in a kind of church sanctuary, insofar as a downward moving pan is always related to the humility of turning towards the humus of the earth? And when we see these skulls, instantly it's, you're taken to the images of where it's churches built entirely of skulls that George Bataille kind of references in his journal, and that we see in different South American and Eastern, Western parts of Europe.
You see it underneath Paris.
Underneath Paris, yeah. So it's like you're in a sanctuary as well,
Yeah.
that moves through time.
Certainly it is susceptible to that reading. Whether or not there's something that exceeds that reading, I think remains an open question. Camera movements. There's a kind of contingency to those camera movements, a kind of legibility to those that actually is contingent. And so I think to answer that question appropriately, we have to attend very carefully to those contingencies. Yes, it can certainly have a religious reading. It certainly can have a reading having to do with patriarchy as well. It can certainly have, in other words, any kind of taxonomic configuration that we assign to it can also append to a certain contingent reading. So, sure, absolutely.
If you want to think about that film logic again and pair it with the blue tint, it also makes me think of, temporality of daylight, so that you wouldn't be thinking of the blue tint, and dawn doesn't really have blue tint, it's more twilighty. So I would sort of think through that narrative as well as a kind of future at the penultimate moment before we've destroyed ourselves completely, kind of idea. But
I think the blue glow always is evocative of the techno-cultural space, insofar as the early screens were, blue screens of death. That your computer would be washed over by.
I can't help but think of Derek Jarvin's blue film as well.
Not for no reason. But think also Blade Runner, blue filters on Los Angeles. Dark City, blue filters. Television, full of blue filters. Think of the X-Files opening sequence.
Is blue filter just the sci-fi default filter?
Again, it's never quite that easy.
Okay.
But certainly it demarcates a certain disposition. It's usually science fictional. How does it work within the Terminator? What happens every time there's a blue filter? You know the answer.
There's a passage through time, right?
No, we're in the struggle against the machine.
Yeah. Every time there's a blue filter, it's a deictic marker. And you all know what deixis is, yes? Both in rhetoric and in linguistics, spatiotemporal markers. First person pronominals, I. When I say I am sitting here, and Larry says I am sitting here, linguistically it's exactly the same sentence, performatively absolutely different. I'm not you and vice versa. Here, there, now, then, later, before, and so on. All those deictic markers, and deictic markers, by the way, can be sites, visual locations, that sort of thing. Every time you have a blue filter marking that space, it indicates, one, the struggle against the machines because it has already been historicized. Two, a transition. Every time there's a blue filter, you have made the transit from future past to past future. Remember, Sarah Connor's future is Kyle Reese's past, Sarah's future, Reese's present, with Sarah Connor, and so on and so on and so on. The shape of it is a temporal conundrum. It is an acrony. And so within that, it's marked in certain ways. Kyle Reese drives to the outside perimeter of a factory, parks his car, his stolen car, on the outside of a chain link fence. The sun is going down, it's getting dark. imperceptibly the blue filter is shifted in. All of a sudden you have the same subharmonic rumble, blue actinic flashes, and Kyle Reese, having fallen asleep, remembers the future, which of course is his past. So it becomes past, future, dream, and reality, and the problem is to winnow that out. And by the way, we're inscribed into that as well. And every time that blue filter comes up, every time there's a marker that territorializes future to past, past to future, other spatialities, all of that adds to that reading. All of that presents analepsies to a series of prolepsies, and its progression as a kind of structuring mechanism throughout the film is exactly that, which allows bodies, certain bodies, to appear as such. Does that make sense? You see how that works? You have a similar sort of thing with, another digression, sorry, the matrix. When you look at the matrix, look carefully at the title sequence, look carefully at how things work, what is announced, what is spoken, what is told to you in that. Every time there is a disturbance on the surface of the matrix, it is also a deictic marker that tells you that you've gone into a different level of the simulation. The black cat that goes by, and then the black cat that goes by again. Neo looks at it and says, now that small guttural mark catches Morpheus. He says, what? He turns around and says, what did you see? No, nothing. What did you see? No, tell me, what did you see? Well, the cat. It looked like the cat went by again. And then he tells you, he gives you an explanation every time you see a glitch like that. And what does he name the glitches? Vampires, revenants, ghosts, spirits, possessions, etc., etc., etc. Every time you see a glitch, angels, devils, demons, all these things, it's the machine resetting itself. It's a marker for a shift, either an intra-shift within the machine from place to place, or between levels of the machine. So, it works. It works very well. We unconsciously read those markers very well. We are very adept readers. We don't have to go into a movie and learn how to read the whole movie all over again. We learned. We know it very well. Well, it's interesting. I was commissioned to write a set of reviews on The Matrix, and when Matrix, the second one, came out, the courier who was supposed to bring me the film, it hadn't been released yet. I had to catch a plane. I caught my plane, missed the film. Shit, what a drag. So on Canal Street, there was a bootleg. And so I grabbed the bootleg. I have something to work with. Flew to Amsterdam, watched the bootleg. Well, the bootleg was very interesting because it was in some theater. Somebody put up a digital camera. They put it on the seat. So it starts. It's a fairly good copy. And all of those things play out. Every time there's a glitch on the surface of the screen, you understand that it's a transitional point, you have to figure out where you are, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then somebody comes by, bumps the seat that the camera's on, and there's a shift, kind of wobble on the camera. My reflex, and everybody else's I've shown this to read the wobble. And all of a sudden I'm someplace else. I've been ejected, in a way, from the narrative of the film. Its topology is someplace other, and by the way, it didn't put me back into the theater, it didn't put me back into the body, it didn't put me back into some imaginary, but some elsewhere. And so it took a while, a struggle, a few seconds at least, to get back. Every time somebody would cough, sneeze, fart, burp, talk, whatever, it was a disturbance of that field, because it was already caught within that medial frame. So, very interesting how that works. Yes, please.
They say that they make that really explicit in Inception when he's talking about noticing the
they
strangeness around and realizing the imagery and you see, these sort of things. So it's that scene in the bar where he's like explaining to,
No, it's the same sort of thing, and it's good to pay close attention to not only what's spoken and what's shown. there is a kind of cinematic sleight of hand that plays very well in terms of shaping and constraining a narrative. But Inception, is a bit clunky all the way in, but at a certain point, it absolutely worked. At a certain point, there was a threshold where that worked, and it sort of needed that announcement. It's just like Kyle Reese, who announces the Terminator in that scene with Sarah Connor, says, he describes what it is. It is without pity, without emotion. You cannot reason with it, you cannot argue with it, you cannot beg anything from it. It will keep coming, it will keep coming all the time. That's all it does, that's the only thing it does until you're dead. Well, that list of attributes announces what you've just seen. You've seen something that has been shot and hit by trucks and set on fire and blown away with shotgun, gone through a plate glass, etc., all these things. Those things all work in concert.
Is that the return of the continued return of the request? It will keep coming after you. Could you potentially read it that way?
Don't think for a moment that the return of any request does not have a proleptic shape or conduit for it. I would suggest that prolepsis can very often be, not only that, but very often be the shape of exactly such a return or such a possession, yes. Does that make sense to you?
It could. Does he have to return from the repressed? That was more like the death trap.
Well, more like the death trap, but perfectly spot on, because in fact, let's attend to the Terminator's return. He gets shot, he gets up, he returns. He gets shot, he gets up, he returns. He gets hit with a truck, he gets up, he returns, and so on and so on. Every moment can be described rhetorically as the shape of a prolepsis. Every analeptic moment, every culmination, the moment where he's going to catch the victim, dispose of the victim, he in himself dispatched. At every point, that's not an analepsis at all, but yet another prolepsis. So it's the shape of, in a sense, the rhetorical shape of the horror movie is exactly, oh no, not again. It keeps coming. And it can be used to good purpose. Alfred Hitchcock in Frenzy. You've seen Frenzy? Mm-hmm. The necktie murderer, a guy whom we as the audience know, but nobody in the narrative knows. A young woman goes back to the guy's apartment. He's a affable, slightly creepy guy, but we know it's a necktie murder. The camera, and one should always attend to cameras that pause, hesitate, linger a bit too long or a bit too short, or follow things, because there's something happening there. The camera follows the murderer and his victim across, down a block, across the street, into a building, up the stairs, up another flight of stairs, to the door of the apartment. As the murderer and his victim walk into the door of the apartment, the camera is stopped because the door closes on it. And Hitchcock doesn't leave it there. The camera backs up all the way down the stairs, out of the building, across the street, down the block, and 2 blocks more, giving us the time within which to be absolutely terrified. That also is a kind of proleptic analeptic structure that shapes that affect. So the Terminator does all sorts of that.
For the sake of clarification, the repressed can only return under a different guise. So either it's more monstrous or what have you. Let's say if the Terminator himself from the start is the return of the repressed, then that would be conceivable that he could keep on returning as the repressed.
That's what I was wondering.
Okay.
But it's a perfect point. It's a perfect transition. What do you actually want here? Perfect transitional point, because how is it at every point that the Terminator returns, the body is inscribed into that? Through a kind of attrition, through the acquisition or accretion of wounds. Holes in the body, it's burned, hair is removed, stuff like that. At every point that it returns, it is more monstrous. Yes, the repressed returns exactly as you say, And even though we have the sort of the solace of reaching around, pinching ourselves in the ass, it's only a movie, still there's that shape of it, and to the point where it finally is stripped of its envelope of flesh, and the chromolabrum endoskeleton comes out and continues the pursuit. So it may well be that kind of return. Yes, please.
Triangulating things that seems a really good example of the repressed literal sort of embodiment is in Ghostbusters 2, I think. Ghostbusters 2?
Yeah.
There's a green slime that actually represents the evilness and sort of anger of the universe. You know, it's kind of.
Oh yeah.
You remember this?
Yeah.
Anyone who saw it was very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this flowing river of slime that was actually supposed to be the negativity of relations between the workers.
But also, close attention to all those places where that slime gets smeared would be a good way to read that too. Yeah, absolutely. That brings us to the body of the Terminator. What do we make of that? We've already heard what Kyle Reese has said about it. It is an endless proleptic killing machine. How would you describe that body?
Indestructible.
Sorry?
Indestructible.
Yeah, indestructible, but even just simple, direct phenomenological description. How does that body appear? How does the Terminator appear to us?
Hard.
Hard. Sorry.
Shaped like a human.
Sorry?
Shaped like a human. And
You think?
Sort of. Looks like a weird looking thing.
Yeah, but no, the shape of the body. Let's look at this carefully. The shape of the body.
I'll probably fast forward.
No, go ahead, please.
It's in the two films, but I would say the body is dominated by the breasts. It's maternal.
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. There we go.
Your machine's working at you.
Yes, we can get it.
Oh, good. Yes, I will do that in a moment. Yes, thank you. That's absolutely true. But even before we get there, the body of the Terminator, if you describe it, and we have access to all those descriptions, and we've seen all those exemplars of that, it is a chrome molybdenum endoskeleton, an architecture of technology covered by a thin veneer of human flesh. It has to be living in order to travel through time, and so on and so on. So, in that sense, it is suggests, evokes, Mary Shelley's creature, Victor Frankenstein's creation, which is for us uncanny because not of its monstrosity, not of the conditions of its appearance, but that attendant to its appearance is a certain kind of intimacy which we cannot withstand. It is, and you can read this in slightly different modulations in the 1818 and 1831 text, a cautionary tale about vivisection. In Shelley's texts, in James Whale's film, in the Hammer Studios films, and the various incarnations, if you will, since then, it is a living composite, the inverse of a fragmented body, vivisection held together by an external shield, an architecture, an exterior architecture through which, technology through which is grounded life. The Terminator is the precise opposite of that, a thin envelope of living flesh that encompasses, encloses, transports, if you will, the non-human, the machine. So that inversion is a very interesting thing to keep in mind that we can continue to explore. What's the intermedial position between Frankenstein, a composite of flesh construed within an architectural frame, and the Terminator, a cyborg, an architecture of monstrous machinery construed within the envelope of human flesh. What is the intermedial position of that?
Darth Vader?
Robocop.
No. Within the Terminator.
Oh, within, sorry.
No, think about it. What is the body that mediates between these two bodies? It's that body that appears. It's Schwarzenegger's body. Schwarzenegger's body, which is an articulation between human physiology and the gymnasium. It is an instance of gymnasium, the Greek term for, it is an ascesis, a practice where the gymnasium is the commitment to a contest, a test, a battle, a pursuit, a quest, all of that. But that preparation, the ascesis, that ascetical preparation for that slots in. Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe, is of course the figure of the Terminator, the figure of the monstrous. He is in and of himself a monstrance. And you can't forget the root of that monster, monstrum, to demonstrate, to demonstrate, to show, to bring into appearance. The Christian ritual of showing the body of Christ post-transubstantiation is to put the host into a device and to show it. It's called a monstrance.
Oh, sorry, how is it called? A monstrance?
Monstrance.
Monstrance.
Yeah, the very same word. So what is a monster? What is the monster? Mary Shelley and Victor Frankenstein, what is the monster that appears on the screen? And what is the monster, the monstrous interlocutor of the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe? Well, it may well be a tempered monstrosity, but still something we have to attend to. That collusion of bodies that is there. So, is it clear? Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. And please help me out at any point. So, what sort of interiorities do such bodies have, do you suppose? Is it just a surface? Or a surface within a surface? Is it just a frame within a frame?
Well, isn't that the question that Blade Runner proposes?
You think?
Well, it's always the question that, I mean, depending on when you view it, like when I first viewed it, for instance, as a child, thinking, oh, well, it's okay if they kill them, they're just machines, right? And then when you get older, you start thinking about it sort of differently. It's like, well, what kind of life does this machine have, or this hybrid have? And so it is something that, through different viewings, through different stages, in my own subjective viewing of it, has changed.
What do you do with that scene where Leon says, what's a turtle? No, what's a tortoise? what do you do with a scene like that? Where does that enunciation position or problematize that sort of thing? It's okay to dispatch them because they're artifacts.
Well, in a way, I mean, the book attests to, it sort of serves as an indicator of the potential that Leon does turn out to be a replicant. As well as attesting to a sort of naivete and innocence that one would only want to attribute and protect within a human.
Yeah, the test is doubled, isn't it? And it is conclusion. One can only consider that the sort of evidentiary securing of the result of that test is ambiguous at best. It would seem to be the turning point of the whole movie. Are they human or not? If you can't tell.
You can't tell in a movie. Everyone's an android on the screen.
Everybody, flickering sensibility. Although even that will undo us. Even that will undo us because at a neurophysiological level, two things happen. One, our optical system operates to presume of shifts and changes, disparities in cognitive luminosity as substance. we do that. Pavlov was quite good about describing that as early as 1923. In the early 1990s, an Italian research team discovered something, or named something, saw something strange happen, and they called them mirror neurons. You all have heard of mirror neurons, that if I do something like, and you watch me do that, and we're both hooked up to a functional magnetic resonance imaging system, those areas of my brain, usually Broca's, Wernicke's area, the parietal region, will light up in a certain pattern. And I do this because it means we have to move this thing to do these things. What's curious, your brain, watching that, will light up in exactly the same places, even though you don't move. Well, the curious thing about that research is that works fine live, and when you put a body onto a screen, live closed circuit, or a videotape, and you have a test subject attached to a functional magnetic resonance scanner, and that sort of thing happens, the very same areas of the brain light up. What does this do to film theory? Gives us an interesting problem to work with, doesn't it? So, in a sense, you're right, they are shadows, flickering sensibilia, but they are shadows that compromise, in every sense of that word, our bodies, our investments, our desires. As Freud says, we're quite capable of investing not only with any element on the screen, with any combination of elements on the screen, every element on that screen. And I think interesting to inquire from a neurophysiological perspective precisely the nature of that investment, because I think it does set itself into inclusion with psychoanalytic categories in a very, very interesting way. Yes, please.
That's why it's really interesting. I think it's in the second one, but going along with that exact same idea, then that how it still is so like painful to watch Arnold cut off cutting his hand. If it's just like this empty machine kind of thing, but it cuts up his arm, like cutting it open, that which is like the most painful thing. It's still like it's a human.
Why do you think it's painful?
What?
Why do you think it's painful?
Well, because you still see that surface, and it still seems like a human. It's just, I mean, I don't know. It's just
no, we do that.
terrifying.
Why? Why does it affect you? Why do you think we? But it's painful.
You imagine yourself cutting your own body.
Why do we do that? It's flat. It's a shadow. It's a screen. And even if we respond to it neurophysiologically that way, let me believe it. It's not that we have access to that response. We would need an entire envelope of technology to bring that out, to pull that trace out of us. It's not that we can possess that. I'll give you an example. At a certain point, the Terminator, having been thrashed, hit, shot, etc., is a bit damaged. He's found his way into a C hotel. He must climb up the outside window, that's implied. He sits there, and it's, by the way, it's a scene appended to the point where he cuts a hole, starts doing that and working with what we would recognize as fine motor control. He also has a grievous injury to the eye. It's a scene where he works on the eye, which is, you can't help but think of Dali and Buñuel in a way. It's a bit squeamish in that way. But what happens in that scene? Camera cuts to the outside. There's a janitor pushing a barrel, sweeping compound brooms and whatnot. Down the hallway, he gets to the door behind which the Terminator is doing his work. He kind of stops, sniffs the air, looks at the door, raps on the door, knock, knock, knock. Hey, what do you got in there, a dead cat? And then what happens? Camera shifts to the interior. You see an establishing shot of the Terminator from a three-quarter view. Then what do you see? Red filter. Red filter, Terminator POV. We've learned that. It's sort of like Predator view in the Predator films. Terminator POV, red filter. Red filter, LED, cursor, tack, 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 a series of choices. The cursor goes down, selects one. Camera cuts outside, exterior. Terminator turns around, enunciates the phrase, "Fuck you, asshole." Camera cuts to the guy in the hallway, who goes, push his cart on, down the hall, end of shot. Here's the question. This is exactly the question that you bring up. Who reads? We know it's a machine. Machines don't work like that. Why should a machine have to laboriously read a series of sentences in English, clack, select one, and then perform it?
So that you can identify with it?
Yeah, so you have the answer. Who reads?
We read.
Yeah. We read. What does that act of reading do to us? Yes, please. Yes. With whom?
With whom? Well, it's an empathetic device or gesture, I guess, since we are able to relate to it. It's a way to establish or the way for us to relate. Who do we relate to?
What is the object of such empathy, empathos, to?
To the Terminator.
To?
To the Terminator in that case?
Yeah, and what does that do to us?
What does it do to us to empathize? Right?
With?
With the Terminator.
Yeah.
What
happens to us in that moment?
Well, it's an interesting question. Do we become, in that moment, more like him or it, or does he then become more like us?
What do you think?
Well, I think the strategy is for us to become more like him.
But the weird thing is if we take the verb humanize, in that instance to humanize we have to mechanize.
Yeah. How would we do that? Actually, we had a couple of questions. Carla, please, yes.
I mean, the command is also the command from God, right? It's used in a lot of political speeches, and if you read, you're actually under the command of something bigger. So instead of talking directly to the being at similar on the audience, if you read, it's channeling something else, right?
Yeah.
There's a bit of a human to actually be under command of, like the machine, right?
It's a bit of a pun, isn't it? A kind of deus ex machina, if you will. You had your hand up again, please?
Well, I was just going to say, when she was talking that it makes us the Terminator, his choice is our choice. So, I mean, we are the Terminator. But I was also going, it also reminded me of on Jeopardy, when I think it was Deep Blue was the name of the computer that competed against the...
Going against Kasparov.
Now, in that case, it was after the fact that they showed the choices that the computer had to choose from the range choices. But yeah, I just remember that.
Well, the question, and it's a question, by the way, which is not so foreign, not so exterior to us, because it's a question that we have to attend to every time we look at the screens we carry around, every time we listen to the voice on the telephone. What do you have to listen to? What is it to be inscribed into the position of the monster in that moment? Yes, please.
Well, it's also kind of it sort of replicates, it sort of represents what we were already doing when we're watching the movie, right? So if we're looking through the eyes of the machine, that's what we're already doing. We're looking through the eyes of the camera, or through the eyes of the projector, and we've already sort of put ourselves in this relationship with the actual machines of the cinema, and so sort of pulling that together. It's like, it goes back to your question about who put the skulls there. It's like James Cameron put the skulls there, and we're sort of
of course, yeah, some DP.
Right. And so we're sort of, we're actually really absorbed into the technology of the cinema itself, not even, and it's just sort of made literal in film by the technology of the film, which is exactly the sort of, all of the humans on the screen already are all androids because they're all this reflection that's coming from the projector, because when we're watching through the projector, it's all there.
I didn't mean to say that they're all androids, but there's no difference between an android and a human on the screen, is what I mean to say.
Oh, I like both of them. I mean to say they're all androids.
Well, since we're talking about identification, in this scene, is Arnold, did you say he was wounded or something?
It's the scene where he's sitting on the bed and he's fixed his hand and he's fixed his eye.
But it's you see him opening himself.
Yeah.
Because, Benjamin says that the identification of the alignment with the camera would actually increase our testing distance and participation with what we see. Kind of a better word. But if the figure is wounded, that's always the origin of identification. Anything wounded, it could be, a car, big eyes that are listening.
Well, and also there's another sort of Benjaminian collusion to that in section 12 of the essay on technical reproducibility, the third one. He says, it's quoted in Benny, but all the text, the camera does not see. In fact, what it does is it introduces us into a kind of conscious objects which proceeds by way of a technical intercession. And that intercession is what you're describing with your comment. The other Benjaminian notion that is absolutely appropriate to the notion of a wound and of identification is the distinction that you make slightly earlier than that in this very same essay on the relationship between the shaman and the surgeon. That intimacy and proximity is secured by one, the shaman who is very, very close in one sense, but also very, very distant in terms of the attendance to your body, through a ritual that can't have an application in the same way that a surgeon can. A surgeon who may not know you, may have no identification whatsoever in that scene, has his thumbs in your intestines, a different kind of intimacy. And so that play that Benjamin speaks about, the play of that technical intercession, the camera as that interlocutor of bodies, absolutely pertains. And in the way that you describe it, it also beckons that thought: what is rendered salient in that, what is hidden over, what is transferred or transformed in all those. And it's exactly that question of identification, of empathy, of transfer. So, that's what it is. Yes, please, go ahead.
Is there still a distinction then with the character, if it's someone you want to identify with as much? Say, for example, in the Terminators, it's this robotic thing underneath. And then I'm thinking of say with in No Country for Old Men or something like that, when Anton Chigurh, right after he gets kind of hit with part of the shotgun, and so then he goes into the hotel. In a weird way, it's kind of similar, I guess. And then he's banding himself up, and he's this monster. And it's would it be that we would identify more than with someone who we want to identify? I mean, you don't really feel as much empathy for someone who is this kind of character like Anton Chigurh, but sure you do, I guess. But I'm just wondering if there are degrees like that.
No, it's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how to take that other than to suggest perhaps there's a kind of propriety to the wound, a kind of properness to a wound, that if there's an exceeding of the body. There's Paco Ignacio Taibo is a historian and a writer. He writes sort of crime procedurals. He has a character, Hector Los Shane. And what's interesting about the character, who reappears through a number of different novels, is he becomes the site for this radical attrition rate. He loses an eye, he gets stabbed, he gets shot, a finger is gone, a toe is gone. He's unconscious for almost entire novel, and then so on and so on. So what does that do to the kind of the technical index, whether by photography or the act of writing, of verisimilitude, the index of the real? What happens with exaggeration? Is there a point? And what kind of point, perimeter, line is the propriety of a wound? You want to take that one? I don't know how to pull that more together.
I don't know if you can see that film.
But I think the question is still, pretty interesting, which is at what point does the wound, if it becomes so accumulated or excessive that it goes into the monstrosity territory, and that you don't identify, then it becomes uncanny, right? I think that's something that happens because, so for instance, let's take people who have a lot of cosmetic surgery also. In some ways you could see them as kind of wounded, I think, to some degree, but on the other hand, they're also monstrosities, and they're very, they create fear in me.
Like Stellark or Lamb.
Yeah, exactly. Or the Pace Wildenstein woman.
Yes,
the Catwoman.
Who I met once.
Oh.
Very interesting. No, it's
Because there's a certain point where it switches, you don't identify with them anymore.
right.
The quantity of wounds.
Well, there's also a notion of excess too. I mean, think of Socrates. Think of Philocrates, whose wound will not cease, it will not close. It has a stench and odor. It produces secondary effects like his constant crying. So they have to, get rid of this guy, stick him on a deserted island.
The main character of Johnny Got His Gun.
Ah, yeah.
It's like basically a head with a torso and no face, no arms, no legs. He doesn't even have language really, he just has his thoughts and
Think of those films by Franjou, Tournier, etc., as well. Yeah. You had a point.
I started thinking about Steve Martin for a bit there, and now it's different. It was just a point about the identification of scarring and stuff. There's an article I read recently by Sean Cubitt, who's an Australian, I think, anyway. And the point he was making was about CG characters and how one of the big problems within that sort of world is injuring the characters. Like, it's a very difficult problem to figure out ways to create that kind of empathy. So it ends up being psychic or something having to do with sort of the character, and then that relates to essentially that idea of something dying. Maybe the reason we don't care whether or not it's a bad guy or a good guy who's getting hurt, and whether or not it's one or the other more, is because one or the other of them dying is the movie's about to end. And so it's actually a moment where that interior reality is cleaved a little bit, because it means if he dies, then we'll get to watch the rest of the 100-year-old man. It'll be kind of upsetting moment.
CGI is an interesting and interesting problem for that. Two quick examples for that. Think of what's called in the industry the Burly Brawl in The Matrix. Neo's just going to see the Oracle. He's in this courtyard. The construction of the courtyard is a very interesting architecture, very interesting space. Agent Smith appears. You hear footsteps first. By the way, Agent Smith was curious. Most often appears feet first. You see his shoes. Very curious. I don't know why that is. Anyway, Smith appears.
It's the only thing that connects to the surface.
Yeah, maybe it's a ground, huh?
Yeah.
But he appears, and there's an altercation, and it's the scene where there's a kind of metastasis, a kind of fissioning cellular mitosis, whereby Smith is duplicated over and over and over again. There were 300 bodies, real and CGI. They used body doubles. They did 3D scans of the bodies, shot the bodies, then went back in and texture mapped 3D models. They took Hugo weaving, and they took scans, and he had months of sitting into poses, striking, hitting, dancing, that sort of thing, and composited all that stuff together. So, how does identification work there? Some other things work, like rhythm, for example. We'll get to that in a moment. But I actually wanted to use my second example to circle around to it again and attend to something that you said, about identification. As an early instance, it's also, by the way, a special effect. In Louis Fouillard's serial of 1915, Les Vampires, the vampires, it's absolutely marvelous because you have a village which is preyed upon by a family of vampires, although it's ambiguous whether they're actually vampires or they're a criminal gang that calls themselves the Vampires. And the police, whose mandate is to protect the community. So at a certain point, as things develop through the reels, the vampire family dress in a certain way, like vampires. So we have the nice, it's like the good guys wear white, the bad guys wear black hats, and if you can't quite make out the face as somebody walks across the room, somebody says, "Howdy, Sheriff," and you know who it is. So there are these apparatuses of identification that occur. So the vampires wear vampire costumes, you know who they are. The police, in order to infiltrate the vampire family, don vampire costumes. The community, because they no longer want to be preyed upon by the vampires, don vampire costumes. The scene is set in a theater where there's a play going on called Les Vampires, where everybody's dressed in vampire costumes. So every single body on the surface of that screen is dressed as a vampire, and the possibility of weaving together a narrative there is completely impossible.
Sorry, what is this?
This is an early film by French filmmaker Louis Fouillade, F-E-U-I-L-L-A-D-E. It's called Les Vampires. It's a serial. It's about 8 hours long, something like that. So that's a whole sort of thing, a kind of cinematic sort of overturning of that possibility of identification. All of the bodies are vampiric bodies, and no difference, no distinction. Not even there's no position because they're all moving around on that screen, just like all those bodies of Smith are moving around. Do we have a parallel distributed identification? Do we have a multiplicity or just fragments? What we have with that? What can we identify with? The body of Neo 2 is CGI. He wasn't wearing a long black coat when his actual body was set into those scenes, when the wire work was done. So the whole thing about compositing, that whole sort of technical framework, within which the appearance of bodies is occasioned by an inhuman intercession. It does bring us back into that territory of the android, in a way, and what do we do with that? How do we know when we look at someone, it's just something inside? It's a problem that also you brought up with the Kriegsneurosen, that you brought up with the notion of soldiers who have been in conflict, who have suffered a trauma, who come back, and the figure of their return, culturally in a way, is the figure of the somnambulist, the sleepwalker that you see in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And look at what happens to that. The treatments of the Kriegsneurosen, the description of take oneself out of occlusion, to have left one's post, to be asleep. How does one leave one's post? It's a desertion that in the First World War for the English and for the Germans also had to revise military protocols so that those people who would have been summarily shot now are treated, now become patients, now bear wounds and scars and symptoms, now have the possibility of a certain kind of return. I would say perhaps an uncanny return, because they are treated to the point where they can return to the trenches. What a curious sort of thing, a kind of somnambulism. And then you look at what you might call a kind of precessionary somnambulism, the kind of training which has generated, for us, some of our most recondite and pervasive entertainments, gaming. To produce an attitude that allows us in such an adept manner to take very seriously Hegel's point. The face of the enemy is already blank, always already blank. A place, a category, a site where every form, every shape, every identification of perfidy and evil can be described, and that we can attend to in most precise and lethal manner. To produce bodies that can do that, to produce a kind of somnambulism that can go into the field of battle. And when that field of battle has an indefinite perimeter, what do we have? There's a film I had mentioned the other night in something. Dominic Angeram, who took gun camera footage from the second Gulf conflict taken by Spanish soldiers. You see the heat signature of people moving, and you see them moving, and it's people walking down the street, but they have been priorly identified as enemies. You see them gather, and as they come together, you see these heat signatures, you see it behind walls, you see the trees and all that, but it's absolutely clear. And they're targeted. You see all the markers for that targeting system, but the most disconcerting thing is you hear the voice, a kind of sub-vocalization, such as you would sit there as you're keyboarding, as you're playing games, saying, James, a little more. Okay. Something wrong. Okay. They fire. And you see somebody die. You see that the blur disappear into a white haze. You know, it's that question that Foucault posed at one point. What would it take for 5 guys in red suits to walk out in the middle of the field, stand there in a row, load weapons, as 5 guys in blue suits walk out of the field 20 paces away and do the same thing? Take aim and fire at each other. What sort of subjectivity is required for that to occur? What techniques, what technologies of the self to do that? And it brings up interesting questions of patriotism and reparation, questions of commitment and individuation, questions of identification, all these things. What would it take? Would you do that? So, these are some of the questions. Second part, and by the way, I'm at your service in terms of time. Robots. Androids, cyborgs, robots.
Is that okay, Tom? Can you sort of see me?
There's a bit of distortion. Robots. These are all real robots. Why would a robot smoke a cigar or a cigarette? Why would a robot push a baby carriage or lawnmower, wash a car, iron a shirt? Why would a robot have, this is a robot asking a question, look at the eye on the left-hand side. Why would a robot, it's not smoking cigarettes, why would a robot have nipples, lips, ears, eyebrows? Why would a robot have a bilateral symmetry, even if the robot has a kind of exploded view diagram of a human countenance, a human face? Why would a robot have all these things, anthropomorphic attributes to be sure, legs, feet, hands, eyebrows, and so on, and yet not in any way, not for a second, grant the illusion of a human being. Not like an automaton for a split second, not like an android, not like the Terminator in disguise with its envelope of human flesh, but they appear to be human. And yet they have these unnecessary, supplemental, paragonal human attributes. What do you suppose that is? Yes, please, you have your hand.